Okay, so here we are, and thank you so much for joining me. Great to see such a big crowd today coming in, and delighted, and hope you all take something from this. And of course, I'm always contactable. There's quite a lot of people here who haven't met me before, so let me introduce myself a little bit. Um, what you came for today is about building better relationships in the workplace. So I want to be able to offer a roadmap for that. Um, so for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Neve Hannon. My background is I'm a chartered counselling psychologist, so I have 25 years experience. I worked as a counsellor for 20 of those years. So I had a private practice in South Dublin for a long time. I worked with adolescents as well as adults. Um, and after 20 years, I suppose, of working in mental health with lots of depression and anxiety, I decided to close down my doors and move out of that and look for a change. So I retrained in coaching. That was with Alva Harrington. Trina, you'd be familiar. And so yeah, really, since 2020, then I've been working primarily in coaching with senior leaders. Sorry, it's still some people coming in here. So I developed quite a few work courses, programs, coaching programs really for female leaders. And then over the past year, I've been training with Dr. Lola Gershfield from the States. She heard me on LinkedIn and got in touch with me, and well, I got very interested in what she had to offer, and so I've been training with her, and just completed training. It was did about 9-10 months training with her, and I'm still learning lots. I suppose we'll all be learning for life, so I'm hoping that I can share some of that learning here with you today. I suppose alongside the one-to-one work that I've done, I've also always worked with companies. So since about 2004, for a long time, mainly in the wellbeing space, but now also in the leadership space. So there are just some of the companies there on screen that I've worked with, and many that I continue to work with. So yeah, you might be here on your own behalf today, or you might be here on your company's behalf. Always happy to just to have a Zoom call with you and answer any questions that you might have. The way that I work is that if you're kind of looking for something and I'm not the right person, I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that's not for me, but I'll often know somebody because I have a wide network between psychologists and coaches and therapists. So yeah, I'll often know somebody to refer you on to. So in this time together today, I want to look at why are we even looking at this topic? Why are work relationships important? Why do they matter? And what's their place really in the overall scheme of things. I'm going to take a quick look at emotional intelligence and the key components for leaders and how that ties in. And we'll look at the brain's relationship with emotions also. And I want to introduce you to Dr. Lola Gershfield's EMC approach, which is really a roadmap for repairing and building relationships in the workplace in a very, I suppose, quite a different way than what's already out there. And I just love her approach and think everybody should know it, and it should be, not just in the workplace, but in our own relationships at home, in schools, with kids, with, all our relationships are so important. So why are work relationships important? Why are we focusing on them? Because very often when I speak to people, they don't think their work relationships are that important. We don't think of work relationships or collegial relationships as being emotional relationships in any kind of way. We think of people as colleagues. We barely would bring in the word relationship into the workplace, in fact. And yet, this is coming from Harvard Business Review. 75% of their survey participants said that the most stressful aspect of their job was the relationship with their immediate boss. That's indicating that relationship, and particularly the boss relationship, has a huge impact on our well-being and also our performance at work. A similar number, 75% of people who left jobs said they did so again because of that relationship with their manager. okay, the person that they directly report to. So that relationship in particular, the manager direct report relationship, is so crucial to our work engagement, our work performance, and our mental health and well-being. So the relationship is massively important. If we look at this research, and this comes from McKinsey & Co. in 2020, if we look at the first one there, drivers of life satisfaction, our job satisfaction contributes to maybe 25% of our overall life satisfaction. Mental health has a bigger part to play in that, and then there's other factors in there, other variables. So if we take out then job satisfaction and just study that, drivers of job satisfaction, more important than the job itself are the relationships, the interpersonal relationships in the job. That's 39% as opposed to just 35%. So even if you think you've got the perfect job on paper, an awful lot of your satisfaction in that job is dependent on, sorry, somebody else coming in. An awful lot of that satisfaction in your job is down to the relationships that you have with your colleagues, and as you can see in the third one there, when we look at the drivers of satisfaction in our interpersonal relationships at work, the relationships that we have with management contribute to 86% of that satisfaction, and co-workers then are the other 14%. So our co-workers are important, but the relationship that we have with management is just massive. So it's a really, really critical driver of job satisfaction. So the relationships at work do matter. So let's look into that a little bit. When there's conflict, the root cause of workplace conflict can be seen and understood to be the loss of connection between co-workers, or not just co-workers, but obviously that boss relationship. And that's because we're social bonding creatures, and we need to have connection in order to survive and thrive. So it's like, when we were hunters and gatherers, we belonged to a tribe. If you were rejected by that tribe, it meant certain death for you. And so that's still installed in us so deeply that when we're in our work tribe, if we feel rejected, or if we feel disconnected in some way from somebody important to us, then it has that same kind of impact in us, that it's like we're just struggling to survive. It has that much of a threat on our brain, really. And recent neuroscience research backs that up, that it's highlighted really the consequences of isolation and loss of social connection. It causes an awful lot of stress and distress. And of course, we know that more people are experiencing isolation. That loneliness is being said to be at epidemic levels, and that disconnection. And that in turn leads to disengagement and stress, and can lead eventually to burnout as well on the well-being side of things. So essentially, you have your work relationships, which you often think of as being kind of secondary to your job. But in fact, we know that our job satisfaction, the primary kind of component of that, is the relationship with our manager, and also then our co-workers or colleagues. And we're using the word connection here and disconnect, because while all the research and the literature tends to use the word conflict, conflict is a word that has a lot of different meanings to different people. And sorry, I think somebody's just joined. Would you mind, David, would you mind just muting, because there's a lot of background noise there? Thank you. Thanks very much. Where was I? Sorry, lost my train of thought.
Connection instead of conflict.
Thank you so much, Michael. You were listening. You get all the points. So yeah, when we use the word conflict, what I find is that what comes up in mind, people think, oh, I'm not in conflict, or I don't experience conflict at work, because people think conflict is just, fighting, or like shouting at each other, or being really nasty, or kind of, an escalated state of war really between a couple of people. And absolutely that is outright conflict, but an awful lot of conflict is a lot more underground and implicit. And so we prefer to use the word disconnect, because I might not feel like I'm fighting with somebody, but I can still feel like I'm disconnected from them. And really, the literature and the stats on conflict are including that, but maybe not spelling it out. So when we talk about conflict resolution, again, it's really, you know, in most people's minds, that's dealing with a small fraction of what happens in the workplace. Whereas if we talk about disconnection, you can see that that's happening all the time. And the disconnect is what has the impact on us with the stress and distress, and that kind of going into that fear response and causing us to feel isolated, feel maybe like we're not being trusted, or that we can't trust the other person. And there begins, that's where the breakdown in the relationship begins there. And it can be caught at that early point. But what tends to happen is that when we don't have the skills, that escalates. Because now maybe if I've had a difficult interaction with my manager, for example, or even if I interpreted something that they said or didn't like their tone of voice, maybe, or the way they looked at me, and maybe they're just stressed and it was something different entirely going on. But if I've interpreted that negatively, I might well go and then talk to my colleague about it. And the next thing, you have half the office getting into a toxic situation. And this happens all the time. But of course, it doesn't just happen in our work relationships. It's happening at home as well. The person that you love nearest and dearest, you still experience disconnections from all the time. And during those times of disconnect, that's when you start to feel really irritated, and you start to notice all the little things that just drive you mad about that person. And suddenly you can remember all things from the last 10 years that annoyed you. And you can start feeling very negatively to somebody that you actually love. So if that can happen with somebody you love, then it also transfers very easily into a place where we don't consider that we love people at all in the workplace. So let me just come out, because I want to show you a little video now. Okay.
Manager for a while, but I could sense that I was struggling personally with at least one of my reports very clearly, because there was nothing like major, but there were like little things that would come up here and there, and that it would just make our day-to-day harder than maybe it should have been. There was sometimes a lot of like complaining and whining about like small things that I couldn't understand why, that really triggered me in a way and like drove me crazy, and actually made me want to interact with this person less, right? Which different people react differently, but once you realize that there is this disconnect and this issue, it's really helpful if you can get someone to talk things through and smooth it out. I would feel inadequate or not good enough, or I'm not being a good manager because I'm not able to support her. So then my reaction was to just put distance and shut down. And that also triggered her, because she felt I was not giving enough. And then obviously she was trying even harder, but her way of trying was complaining, which endless negative loop, like you just keep on these dynamics, right? And it's extremely hard to break them, I think, without adequate help. I really think she was, and she's still extremely bright, extremely capable, extremely kind and thoughtful person. I wanted her to be a manager of a smaller team, but I just didn't feel we were ready, either of us, because of the dynamics we had going on between us.
So I just wanted to share that with you, a small little clip from a lady who has used the EMC process in her organization. We'll hear a little bit more from her later. But what you're seeing there, I suppose what she's describing there is what happens between two people quite easily. She was the manager of this other lady, and this other lady was blaming and complaining and giving out. And that triggered Elena, and her response was to kind of distance herself from this person. She couldn't figure out what is she always complaining about, all these little things, and it drove her mad. And so her response was to kind of distance and withdraw from that person because she felt triggered. The other person was triggered by that withdrawal. She could sense Elena kind of moving away from her, not responding to her. And of course, Elena was her manager, and we need our manager. We need them to be accessible. We need them to be responsive. We need them to be engaged. And she wasn't feeling from that. So that actually got her into pursuing even harder. So we're going to look at that cycle in a moment. So just to introduce the whole concept of EMC, and EMC stands for emotional connection. And that in itself is a challenge for people because they often don't think of emotions belonging in the workplace. So the EMC strategy is really about the systematic exploration of those emotions that are present during moments of great stress and moments of uncertainty and volatility. Whenever there's a disconnect happening, it's about understanding those emotions so that we can de-escalate them. And it's actually it's a roadmap, literally, it's a very structured step-by-step process. Because when people feel understood and when those emotions are addressed, then they can work to create emotional safety in the workplace. So we know that psychological safety, I mean, there's been so much research done on the importance of psychological safety in the workplace. And if those relationships can be restored and trust can be restored there, then actually stronger bonds can form. So it's not just about putting on the professional veneer, which is what usually happens. People are like, no, I have no problem. I don't care about this person. Really, honestly, no, I'm just losing sleep. But I can stay professional. I can be as nice as pie in the office, but I don't trust them and I don't like working with them and I'll avoid them when possible. So that's not repair. That's not restoration. So the EMC process works on actually genuinely repairing and helping people to bond again. And very often it cements the relationship in a stronger way than it was previously. And that then means that we can calm our whole system down and can perform again and can, have more brain space left over. Because, and again, talking to people, you hear all the time, the level of distress when something's going wrong, particularly with their manager, but even with the co-worker as well, it causes a lot of stress and distress for people. So as I mentioned, this whole approach has been developed and researched by Dr. Lola Gershfeld, who's based in California. So if we look a little bit at, as I promised, a little bit at EQ, emotional intelligence, and this is there are several different emotion intelligence assessment models. This is one. It's probably one of the oldest ones and one of the best known ones. It's the EQI 2.0 model. And it's circular because there's no particular beginning and end place, and each piece contributes to the other. So there are 5 key scales within the EQI model, and then there are 3 subscales within each of those. So there's 15 different measures here. And you can see that emotional intelligence is about our emotional and social functioning, but it also contributes to our well-being as well. And of course, there's so much research in recent years in particular, showing the importance of emotional intelligence for leaders. And I think with the advance of AI, that this area starts to really become important for us to look at, because as AI can take over, lots of can kind of think faster than a human maybe, and can compute and so on. It's those emotional aspects that are just so uniquely human, and that we are going to need to get better at that side of things if we want to differentiate and still have a job in the future. So very quickly, the 5 scales are the self-perception. So that's what's going on inside you. It's your self-regard and confidence. It's your self-actualization, your drive for self-improvement, and your emotional self-awareness. The self-expression piece then is where other people start to see what's going on. So that's your emotional expression. It's your assertiveness and your independence. Then we move around to the interpersonal. So that's what's happening between 2 people or more. And so they're your interpersonal relationships. There's a measure for your empathy and your social responsibility. There's also then your decision making, it's your ability to problem solve, your ability to, be objective and reality test, and your impulse control when you're making decisions. Do you make rash, spontaneous decisions, or, are you able to think things through even in an emotional situation? And finally, stress management, which is made up of flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism. So the emotions come into all of this. These all contribute to our overall emotional intelligence. Often when people talk about, he or she has zero emotional intelligence or they have very high emotional intelligence. They're talking about it as if it's just one measure, whereas in fact there's lots of different components, and you could be great at some aspects and not great at others. And it's not about getting higher scores on these, it's actually about the balance and how they interplay. So when we kind of map that onto EMC and the EMC approach, you can see here there are maybe 4 key kind of quadrants. There's a self-awareness piece. So through the EMC process, as you're taking part in it and as you repeat it really, and as you learn the process, you're recognizing and you're given the skills to recognize emotions within yourself. Now, that in itself is a key skill, because when we can name and recognize emotions, it actually helps to reduce the intensity of them. So when you're in a situation where you've got escalated emotions between 2 people, as you do when there's conflict, the first job is to de-escalate. And one way, one of the starting points in that, one of the early stages in that, is about recognizing what emotions are present. And when somebody feels heard in that, that helps them to kind of feel calmer, because they now feel heard. They don't have to keep fighting to be heard. There's understanding our own triggers and automatic responses. Again, this is not something that we normally talk about or normally recognize or normally even have the skills to do. And as a psychologist who has worked with emotional intelligence, you know, with leaders for years now, I find this model really helpful, because although there's the EQ model, there's lots of other models to help you to assess and measure where you're at in your emotional intelligence. There haven't really been, you know, structured ways of building your emotional intelligence until now. So by understanding your triggers, your raw spots, your automatic responses, actually, the more you do this and start to recognize your triggers and your raw spots, it's like you start smoothing off some of those edges, and then you become less reactive. So again, you're not just building the self-awareness, but you're finding it easier over time because you're less reactive. You're identifying fears, needs, and the negative cycle, which I'll show you now. You're reaching to the other person for a positive connection. So there is that vulnerability that's required in this process. So it has to be safe. And the whole process, I'll show you actually, and I'll show you on screen in a couple of minutes, but we have a workbook, and you're literally, everything's on paper. You're bringing people down through the process, which means that it's easy for you to follow, even when something's happening in front of you with lots of emotions. But it also creates a lot of safety for people taking part in this, because you're not asking them some fluffy question like, oh, how do you feel now? And they have to pick something out of the sky or try and, you know, dredge through their brains and language to figure out how they're feeling. It's there on paper, and they're just helping you to tick them off. So it makes it actually very contained and very safe for people, and that allows them to be vulnerable with each other. And when we're vulnerable with each other and we can share those softer pieces, that actually helps us to bond. It draws people closer. So we're creating that safe environment for sharing and emotions and learning how to respond to emotions effectively. And then that helps us in turn to generate positive cycles, step out of the negative cycle, step into the positive cycle, and have more bonding conversations. So you're learning these skills because it's not just about this difficulty or this argument or this disagreement. You have to assume there's going to be other fallouts. There's going to be other disagreements. There's going to be other times that you're triggered or you inadvertently trigger somebody else. And now you have the skills to deal with that situation, and not just to kind of smooth over and get past it, but to actually deepen the relationship by going through that. So a little piece on the neuroscience of it all. During these moments of disconnection, the emotional side of the brain hijacks the prefrontal cortex. And so the cognitive functioning of the prefrontal cortex and the social interactions slow right down. Basically, the brain goes into a tunnel vision of survival. It really goes back to attachment theory, if any of you are familiar with that. We're designed to securely attach, and when there's a disconnection, we feel insecure in our attachment, particularly to manager or important colleagues. And so when we feel insecure in our attachment, then that has a direct impact on what's happening, neurologically, and our brain then starts to kind of go into an emergency response. It shuts down all that extra stuff about thinking about what's best for the team or what's best for the company, and it goes into survival mode. What's best for me here? And so in those moments, it's very difficult for people to be supportive, to be responsive to others, to have any empathy, to be collaborative, or even to be engaged. And the danger is that it's not just for a moment, that because the skills often aren't there, that actually what happens is that just goes on over time and gets even worse over time, escalates. So very briefly, staying on the neuroscience side of things, the amygdala is that little part of your brain that is the center of emotions. It's like the primitive brain. Here's the interesting thing about it. It has the ability to control all other parts of the brain. Just letting somebody. So thanks to anybody who's just joined. So the amygdala can override your prefrontal cortex, and it can override any other part of the brain, because your amygdala helps you to survive, and survival is of utmost importance. And so when we feel like we're under threat, our survival drive is what's most important at that moment, rather than anything else. Your prefrontal cortex then is where your logic happens, your executive functioning, your impulse control. It's not fully developed until you're 24, which is why your teenagers, might be very impulsive and do stupid things and take stupid risks. They literally don't have that part of their brain fully developed yet. It's the last part to develop. I think what the really interesting thing here and what's relevant to us today is that your prefrontal cortex does not have direct control over the amygdala. So it's only one way. The amygdala can control the prefrontal cortex. It can override it, but the prefrontal cortex can't take over from the amygdala. So our amygdala has to be calmed down in order for our prefrontal cortex to really do its work. So what that means in layman's terms is that only one can be in the driving seat. And if the amygdala is activated, it's in the driving seat. Prefrontal cortex is pushed into the back, doesn't get a look in. Okay, which is why when there's a disconnect in a relationship, because of our attachment needs, that triggers the amygdala. The amygdala gets into the driving seat. It's in full emotion overload mode, really. And so we can't think clearly, and it can often cause us to behave differently. Even this morning, I was working in a coaching session with a leader, and they were saying that even as soon as they get an email from a particular person or persons, that triggers a defensive reaction in them. And the whole system then is tense. Just that email, it's like the Pavlovian response. Just seeing the person's name can trigger that response in us. And we don't want to have that happening all the time. So the amygdala is being triggered so quickly and so easily and almost automatically then for us. And that means that clouds our judgment. We can't think clearly. The prefrontal cortex is not able to do its work. So I hope some of that's making sense and fitting together for you. I think that's a really important thing to understand for ourselves in our emotions. Why, when you're feeling angry, for example, or hot-headed, you can lose all sense of reason. Of course, you might think that never happens to you, but I'm sure you know somebody to whom that happens to. So yes, that's because our amygdala gets to take charge. It becomes the boss and it overrides the other parts of the brain. So what we need to do then is find a way to calm down the amygdala, to reassure and regain safety, so that the amygdala can kind of step back and go, okay, I'm not needed here. And then the other parts of the brain can kick in again. Okay. So that's just a little diagram of, the amygdala is a very small little kind of almond-shaped part of the brain, but it has the power to override so many other parts of the brain, and yeah, even our cognition, which is why, even though we like to think that we're rational, logical beings, actually we're emotional beings. Emotions are so critically important to everything really in our lives. So let me explain, because Elena in that little video clip talked briefly about a negative cycle. She mentioned a negative cycle. So when there's exclusion, when there's isolation, or just a loss of connection through a misunderstanding or miscommunication, it can be so simple that in itself can trigger a kind of a panic response of the brain, which we call a separation distress based on attachment theory. And that leads some people, like her direct report in the video, to be more demanding, judgmental, and critical, and we call these people pursuers. And other people disengage, distance, and withdraw and avoid, so we call them withdrawers. And that triggers a negative cycle of interaction. So commonly, the most common negative cycle in a disconnect between two people is that pursuer-withdrawer model, okay? And that continuous loop of negative cycles causes conflict or disconnection to just perpetuate, and then it tends to spread. Okay, so I want to help you make sense of that. Are you a pursuer or are you a withdrawer? Which is your primary mode? Because we all usually have one or the other, but sometimes you flip, and with one or two people in your lives, you might be the other because of what they are. So the pursuer is the person who wants to talk about it. So if there's a problem, it's like, let's talk. Okay. I mean, there's memes on this stuff about women saying to men, we need to talk, the wife to the husband, the stereotype. So the pursuer then can come across as blaming, criticizing, judging, complaining, or demanding. You know, we need to talk. Why haven't you answered my emails? I've emailed you 3 times now and you still haven't answered. What's going on? Why aren't you talking to me? Why are you avoiding me? So that's the pursuer behavior. Now that can be seen as protective behavior. They're trying to protect themselves because they're feeling fear and anxiety, okay, in the relationship. The withdrawer is also feeling fearful and anxious, and their pattern is different. So they want to get away from this. I need to stop you. Oh my God, they're trying to avoid conflict, essentially. There's a fear of conflict. So they disengage, they withdraw, they avoid, they may go into stonewalling and silent treatment and total distancing, okay? Here's the crucial part. Both those positions can be understood as each trying to save the relationship. That might be surprising. If you're a pursuer, it's hard to understand, why is this person not talking to me? They're doing that because it's quite unconscious, really, but they're trying to save the relationship because they don't want conflict, because they're afraid it's going to blow up, and that would be very threatening to the relationship and to them. Overwhelming. The withdrawer can't understand, why is the pursuer like at me, blaming, criticizing, giving out everything's wrong, what, why are they doing that? And the pursuer is doing that because they want to fix the problem. It's like, we need to talk about this, we have to work it out, and this is wrong and this is wrong. If you'd only do that, then this would all be better. We wouldn't have a problem. So each can be understood in their own way as trying to save the relationship. And of course, it's not working. It's a strategy. It's not necessarily a healthy strategy. And this is the negative cycle that we often get stuck in. Now, it's possible you could have 2 withdrawers. It's very difficult to get anybody to the table then. It's very difficult to resolve that. If you have 2 pursuers, it can be helped very quickly because they're both interested in being in there and doing whatever it takes to fix this. But typically, you'll have the pursuer-withdrawer model. I'm hoping some of you are identifying with one or the other, or maybe seeing it in some of the relationships around you, and that this might give you some insight into what's happening for the other person when you're feeling a disconnect. So there you have the negative cycle. So in Elena's example, if we see, number one, she was triggered by, I don't know the other person's name, let's call her Mary. So when Mary starts, nitpicking, noticing all the things that are wrong, complaining and so on, that really triggered Elena. And so it hit off some raw spots for her. It brought emotions to the surface, and her automatic thoughts are, I need to get away. Okay, so she starts to shut down. That's part of her protective behavior. She starts to distance and withdraw. So that's her side of the negative cycle. Her protective behaviors of distancing and withdrawing in turn triggered Mary. So Mary's now triggered, and it's like, if you think of the pursuer withdrawer model, it's like Pac-Man. It's like the further one runs away, the other harder the pursuer chases. Okay, because the pursuer even starts to sense that withdrawal is happening. They want to chase because they're trying to pull you back into the ring. Whereas for the withdrawer, as soon as they sense this happening, they're legging it out of there and they're shutting down and pulling down. And I've seen this to extreme lengths. So they go around the same cycle. Their protective behaviors are that kind of blaming, criticizing, judging, which again triggers, and it goes back around and around and around and can get very stuck in that negative cycle. So I promised I would show you the reconnection form here. It's tiny writing. I don't expect you to be able to read it or anything like that. But just to show you that it's literally, the process is so streamlined and it's designed to bring you through different stages. So you're de-escalating as you go and then moving into finally being able to have the bonding conversations with the other person. If you see the red part of this in the center, the internal responses, you might be able to see that there's surface emotions, softer emotions, and primary emotions. If you've recently signed up on my website, sorry, somebody coming in there, you will have received a form, a PDF really about recognizing, with a list of those surface emotions or softer emotions, and a help form as well to help you to use that in your own, to bring awareness to your own emotions. If anybody didn't get that, or if you've been signed up to me for years or anything like that, just reach out, send me an email and ask me for the emotions list, okay? And I'll send that on to you with the tips sheet with it as well. That's a really good place to start. Sorry, yeah, I think somebody just joined there. If you wouldn't mind muting, thank you. So that's a really good place to start, is to, when you are feeling triggered by somebody and you want to self-reflect and build your own awareness, start by identifying your surface emotions and then what's going on under the surface. So the thing about the surface emotions is that they are the ones we see on the outside, on the surface. They tend to push other people away. It tends to be, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's often what we think we should be expressing to the other person, letting them know how angry we are or how irritated we are or how, upset we are. But actually that's pushing the other person away. So often when people attempt to, resolve the situation, they're actually they're digging further into that negative cycle. Whereas when we go into and recognize our own softer emotions, what's really happening under the surface, what's feeding into that, and we share that actually pulls people closer. Okay. So I want to give you another little video.
I've done a bunch of trainings, like managing trainings, whatever, work relationship trainings of different companies and different approaches and conflict resolution. But I think, at least for me, EMC, it's very different and unique and stands out, because it's very hard to speak about emotions, right? And we keep being told that, oh, just, leave your emotions at home and come to work. There's no way. You're you with your emotions, your circumstances. You just move, I don't know, you just divorced, you just whatever went through. You cannot just leave all that behind and go to work as if nothing happened, right? And I think the uniqueness of EMC is that it gives you a structure and a common language to think about emotions and to speak about them in a very open and safe environment, so that then you can actually be aware, acknowledge them, and then implement change and move forward, right? Like get moving, keep moving. Don't get stuck. That you don't need to be stuck. You can actually move forward. Yeah, I think it's just honestly life changing. You just gain a whole new perspective on everything. So try it. It's hard to even.
Yeah. So in conclusion, really, healthy employee relationships are what lead to productive, profitable companies. Relationships are so important. They really do matter in the workplace. And so EMC, in a nutshell, helps companies master the art of relationships so that you can spend less time dealing with people issues and more time focusing on the real work. In other stats, approximately 85% of people in the workplace have experienced conflict of some level. And another US stat would indicate that, and this is probably a kind of a low number, that because I've seen other stats that would be a lot higher, but one measure it showed that every employee spends an average of 3 hours per week dealing with conflict or disconnect. Okay, difficulties in relationships, in other words. So that's an average of 3 hours for everybody in your team. Now, I don't know how many people are in your team, and then multiply that out for how many people are in your company, and multiply that out by the 3 hours per week per person. And that suddenly you can see is how just massive the problem really is. There's a huge waste of time and resources in a way that's usually quite inefficient, because these things aren't being resolved. Very often people are managed out as if they are the problem. And that's another thing that I like about this approach. It's not about scapegoating somebody and identifying, okay, they're the problem. It's about recognizing that, okay, in the space between me and this other person, there's a negative cycle happening, and I need to recognize my part and they can recognize their part, and together then we can resolve this rather than pushing one person out. So even PIPs and performance improvement plans and that kind of performance management would be a lot easier if people had these skills, really. Because when somebody feels disconnected, their performance is impacted, and they're possibly going into that negative cycle, in a way that triggers you, and then the work isn't getting done, and we can't work to our potential when half our focus is going on the difficulties and the stress that we're having. So what it's made up of essentially is, as you've seen in that form, that's a reconnection form. So it's like you bring people through a reconnection session whenever there's a disconnect. But there's also training for all levels of the company, different levels of training, so to help people to learn this process for themselves, and so they can use it. Particularly leaders and managers within organizations can use this with their own teams, and it helps to build team cohesion and engagement, and build the team relationships, and then in turn performance. And ideally, there'd be some coaching over time to really install the learnings from this. So it's quite easy to learn as a process, but to really implement and deepen the emotional intelligence linked in with this, that takes a little bit of time. That doesn't happen overnight. So if you really want your teams to thrive, and you want to be able to lead teams to get to that point, then the coaching part would be recommended. Why would you do this? Again, I think hopefully by this point, some of that is pretty clear. So EMC does help to resolve workplace conflict and the disconnections, and so it increases productivity. It's about creating a psychologically safe environment, and that in turn increases team effectiveness. It's a very structured and safe way to address the anger, the stonewalling, the passive-aggressive behavior, and the lack of trust that happens in the workplace when there's any kind of breakdown in a relationship. It's a safe way to repair relationships and increase emotional connection, and that bonding then helps everything. So you can build agile teams that can evolve and change. So when we're dealing with so much change happening in organizations and in our world, with technology and war and conflict and COVID, all of those things, that when you have that relational strength and you have that common language, that helps you then through all of those challenging times. And it helps, in the bigger picture, it's about developing a healthy culture that supports coaching, supports collaboration, and supports that commitment to each other as well, and respect. So final little video. Just going to check if we've, just one or two more little slides after that. So we will finish up in plenty of time and have time for questions as well.
I mean, initially it was, to be honest, a bit scary because I also wasn't aware how this person would react to the whole proposal. But she actually responded very positively. And I think, I mean, we had a really good, very few sessions. we were able to, I think, make significant progress and have really breakthroughs for both of us on how we react, what we need from the other person to feel supported so that you can do your best work, both her and me. And then I'd say within the next 3 months, I mean, she was promoted to manager, and now it's a year and a half later, and she's actually, because I left the company, she's actually holding my position. She's director of the technical support team. So she's doing amazing. I'm much closer to her. We're friends outside work. So yeah, it's been really, I'd say, life-changing. Also for me, just to go through the process and then just realize in other interactions with other people, not just with her or not just at work.
What did you sense about your emotional well-being or your mental health in those moments? How did it improve?
I was calmer for sure. I felt more grounded, more secure, I'd say. It's better, happier, honestly. Everything felt easier. Yeah, definitely. It's pretty interesting to think about it in retrospective, all the changes that actually happened. Yeah, she was definitely much more at ease, much more confident, and I think knowing and realizing by doing the process and talking through what she needed from me, I think I was able to give her the support or the confidence that she needed to actually take the jump and keep growing. It was just easier. There was no more, I don't know, there was no more whining, no more like weird, much more straightforward communication, very open. Sometimes we just say like, look, I'm not okay. Okay, I'm fine. That's okay. Let's, what's happening. Let's talk about it and let's move forward. Very different, very, very different. And I think she's actually also tried, as she's been managing more people and taking even more and more people in her team, to actually implement some of the things that we went through and that the process that we did, right? So I know people that are now in her team that are very, very happy also. And
I'm just going to stop that there because I'm aware of the time moving on quite rapidly for us, and I want to be able to wrap this up for you. But I think it's she says it much better than I could say it, in the sense that you can see the impact that it's had, not just on her, but for the other person who was missing out on a promotion because of the disconnection between the two of them. And within 3 months of them resolving that disconnect and doing this process, that other person got made manager, and a year and a half later now she's now doing Elena's job as director. So it was really just cleared the path for her to move forward, which she could have ended up leaving the company and not being promoted at all had it continued. So I just want to let you know about, okay, I've already let you know that if you want that worksheet, just get in touch with me if you haven't already got it. But I want to let you know about, I'm running Ireland's first, in fact, Europe's first live EMC training. And it's planned for the end of January, probably about the 24th. It'll be a 2-day training with a follow-on half day about a month later online. So the 2 days will take place in person, and then there'll be an online component just to follow up. Once you've got kind of practicing to come back and check in with you. So it is a certified masterclass with 8 modules. It's ICF, that's the International Coaching Federation. It's accredited by them. I'm applying for the Psychological Society accreditation also. I'm not sure if that's of interest to anybody. And it will be held, the details have yet to be confirmed, but within about an hour of Dublin. So and there'll be small numbers because I want this to be maximum learning opportunity for everybody. So it's your first opportunity to do it live. You will, as part of the as part of the package, you will get access to the online training as well. If you're interested and don't want to do it live, you can do the online training anytime. So that all of that, well, if you're interested in the online training, just check out emcleaders.com. That's the American website. They have masses of resources and case studies and lots of different things to check out, their white papers and so on. There's also Dr. Gershwin's book, Emotional Connection. It's not big. Somebody else told me they read it over a weekend, but there's lots of resources and information in there. If you're interested, just get in touch with me. And of course, this webinar will be available on my YouTube channel, which is @Niamh_Hannon, and all my previous webinars. So I've shared different tools really and resources in each webinar, and there's probably about 5 or 6 of those on my YouTube channel now. So if you feel free to go back through those. The other little thing that I wanted to share with you, and I'm just going to put it into chat now, is where are we? Here's chat. Okay, I can see some questions in chat as well, or things. Okay, so just going to share a link for you. But if you are interested in learning a little bit more about the training, the upcoming training, this just allows you to register your interest so that I keep you up to date with the details as they emerge. Hope you enjoyed today. Thank you so much. Take care.